Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Inspiring Women Transforming Science, a virtual event by the Rosalind Franklin Society that highlights successes and spotlights critical changemakers. I'm Uduak Thomas, Senior Editor at GEN, and it is my privilege to be your host for this University Leadership and Opportunity session. I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished guest speaker for the session. Dr. Stacie Grossman Bloom is the Chief Research Officer and Vice Provost for Research at New York University. In the role, she is responsible for leading local, national, and global activities regarding research policy and helping to define and sustain emerging research opportunities. She's also responsible for promoting interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary research, affirming the integrity of research processes and policies, stewarding the physical and computational infrastructure necessary for research leadership, and participating in federal and state research-related policymaking, among other responsibilities. Dr. Bloom joined NYU in 2011 as the inaugural executive director for the Neuroscience Institute at NYU Langone. And in that role, she was responsible for managing strategy and operations. She then became the Assistant Vice President for Policy and Administration. And in that role, she partnered with the leadership of the medical school and hospitals to align the overall strategy of NYU Langone across its basic science and clinical departments and institutes. Beyond NYU, she has accomplished so much more, including serving as associate editor at Nature Medicine, as well as the vice president and scientific director of the New York Academy of Sciences. She received a prize from the Society of Neuroscience in recognition of her outstanding dedication to mentorship. And she's also held fellowships at the National Institutes of Health, National Institutes of Mental Health, National Alliance for Research on Schizophrenia and Depression, and the Rockefeller University's Women in Science program. Dr. Bloom, we are honored to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get things started with a brief presentation from Dr. Bloom, and then we'll have a brief discussion. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this event. I'm a huge fan of the Rosalind Franklin Society, and it's such an honor for me to be here today and to speak with all of you. I was asked to give a little bit of background about my own career path and my professional trajectory. So I thought I would speak quite informally about what brought me here today. And if that sounds good to all of you, I will just get started. So I was born in Brooklyn to an immigrant family where nobody had gone away to college. I did not know anyone growing up who had been a scientist. And I think about my career trajectory as a series of sort of fortunate events and amazing opportunities that were largely brought to fruition due to some amazing people and mentors who I met along the way. And so I think a lot now about how to pay that back and how to help other people who are trying to navigate a career path that may feel very alien or unknown to them. So I went to college. My family did not want me going very far from home. They were very protective, but a few hours drive was okay with them. And I ended up going to the University of Delaware for my undergraduate degree. I was super, super interested in psychology and neuroscience at the time, which is the field I ultimately explored, was not even a degree granting program. It was still a very interdisciplinary, unknown, evolving kind of field. But I loved psychology, I loved math, I loved chemistry, and I kind of combined all of those things. And ultimately, in my senior year of college, applied to PhD programs in interdisciplinary programs in neuroscience. So as life would have it, I'm from New York, but my family had relocated to North Carolina. And I looked at a map, where can I go that's close to New York and close to North Carolina? And sort of right in the middle was Washington, D.C. So again, making decisions kind of flying by the seat of my pants, not a lot of guidance here, but looking back, definitely some good intuition, and definitely a lot of luck. So I ended up applying to the interdisciplinary program in neuroscience at Georgetown University. I got an interview. I went and I met one of the most amazing women. Her name was Karen Gale. She was the head of the pharmacology department at the time. Again, neuroscience was still not its own discipline. And she had been the principal investigator on a training grant. And there were spots available for PhD students. And she took, I think, a leap of faith in me. I do not think, looking back, knowing what I know now about neuroscience education, about PhDs, about curricula, I don't know if I was the most qualified candidate, but I think that I was a very convincing candidate. And I had great chemistry with her, which is a very important thing to have in your career. And I got one of these spots. So I did my PhD at Georgetown. My PhD is in cell biology. Again, neuroscience was not a degree granting program. And I went to go search for a postdoc, right, which is the next step in scientific training. I knew after graduate school that I wanted to come back to New York, come back to my hometown, but it was extremely overwhelming to think about where in New York I wanted to go. New York happens to be filled with amazing research universities, tons of amazing and interesting research, and academic institutions are here in New York. And I got a wonderful piece of advice from someone at the time that I've taken to heart and think about as I go through my career, even to this day, which is, when you're applying, apply to the best place possible. Don't doubt yourself, have the confidence to do it, and always shoot really, really high, aim very, very high. And he had said to me, and if you're going to go to New York, the best place to go is the Rockefeller University. Rockefeller is a very small place. It doesn't have an undergraduate curriculum. It doesn't have an undergraduate population. And so not a lot of people have heard of it. But if you're a scientist, you've definitely heard of it. It produces an immense number of Nobel laureates. It is a wonderful university. And when you're a postdoc applying for a position, you apply directly to the lab that you're interested in. It's not like through a central HR unit, as if you're going to work at another kind of organization. And I found a lab that I loved. And something really interesting had happened with my graduate school advisor at the time that also had a big impact on my career. The work that I was doing in graduate school was very much related to the work of one of her collaborators at another institution in New York. And her advice at the time was that I should continue along this path of investigation, and I should go and explore an opportunity in the lab of her collaborators. Now, I didn't know if that was the right advice, but other people had told me a postdoc is an opportunity to learn a whole new field within your discipline and pivot and learn something complementary or do something different. And that resonated more with me. And so I very independently, really without her support, applied to a lab that was a molecular neurobiology lab that worked on synaptic plasticity, which is how your brain changes as a result of learning or forming new memories, or how your brain changes when you have a disease or an insult, right? Your brain is very plastic. Your synaptic connections change over the course of your life. I thought that sounded really interesting. And I applied to Paul Greengard's lab and ended up coming to New York for an interview and getting a position. And 5 months after I joined the lab, he won the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. And it was one of the most, you can imagine, one of the most amazing professional experiences, personal experiences that you could ever imagine having. And he was so celebrated, and the lab was such a wonderful supportive work environment. It really felt so amazing to be a part of something that was so successful. The penultimate success, right? The ultimate success in science. But nevertheless, the lab was not the right environment for me. And I think for a lot of people who go through the process of getting a PhD and becoming a postdoc within academia, you think that that's your only career path. There wasn't a lot of exposure to what an alternative career might look like. I didn't have a lot of contacts for people who had done PhDs, but who had pursued opportunities outside of the laboratory. I think now it's more common to have these kinds of discussions, but at the time it was kind of looked down upon to have had this formal academic training and then abandon it for something different. But it just didn't feel right to me to be in the lab. I love big picture things. I love working with people. I love big projects. And I loved writing and I loved communicating science. So I took an internship at Nature Medicine, the journal, the medical journal. And at that point, my eyes were opened because I had been so focused on a tiny protein in a tiny synapse in the brain. And now suddenly, autoimmunity, cancer, immunology, physiology, bone health, AIDS, HIV, gut-brain interactions. I mean, we studied and we read everything across the board, anything related to medicine. And I felt like I went at that point from being an inch wide and a mile deep in a subject to being a mile wide and not very deep, but wide and broad. And my mind had been opened and I learned so much about science at that job. And it was an amazing networking opportunity. And after a bit of time, I decided I wanted to try my luck in the not-for-profit space. Again, New York City was a wonderful place to explore those opportunities. And I went to the New York Academy of Sciences. I was the vice president and scientific director there. It was an amazing job. I was there for about 5 years. And I'm a mom. I have 3 daughters. And I had all of my kids while I was at that position. The interesting thing about that is that was the time in my life where I moved from being more of an individual contributor to really being a leader over a very large team, a growing team, and also becoming a mom for the first time and the second time and the third time. And this convergence of motherhood and leadership that made me think really hard about my values, my priorities, how to kind of lean into the work rather than take myself out of the workforce at that point. Made me really think hard about how to build a team, who is the right team, how do I balance my life, my work, my leadership, what do I want to do? All of these things kind of came together for me at that point. And the importance of networking. So in that position, the chairman of our board had been at the time the president of NYU, John Sexton. And NYU had just gotten a $100 million philanthropic gift to start a neuroscience institute, which was an opportunity for me to go back to neuroscience. So I had come from neuroscience, I had explored all of science and medicine, and now I could come back to sort of my home, my heart, and start this institute, this neuroscience institute. And that evolved into a wonderful place, a place of scholarship and accomplishment, a place of research impact, clinically, basically, across the board. Amazing colleagues. We built a wonderful, wonderful place. And I moved into administration at that point across the School of Medicine when this position that I'm in now became available. So this was about 6 years ago. This is the vice provost for research position at the university. And this has been my home since about 2018. This position resonated with me a lot because this became an opportunity to really oversee research operations, research compliance, the safety of our human and animal subjects, our entire research portfolio, which is so big. NYU does research in 97 countries on every single continent. I also oversee the research development effort, which is really a proactive identification of opportunities to continue to grow and expand our research enterprise through many, many mechanisms. I oversee entrepreneurship and innovation, so the university's intellectual property portfolio, the management of our entrepreneurial program and our e-labs, the management of the university's venture fund, our patent producing activities, and our startups, which is also such an interesting thing to see. And then our research strategy, not only in New York, but NYU is a global university with campuses all over the world, sites all over the world. We do a lot of work at NYU Shanghai, NYU Abu Dhabi. And so thinking through the global strategic plan for research across the entire university. And I'm very proud to say that in the past 5 or 6 years since I've been in the role, we've more than doubled our research expenditures. We've moved more quickly in terms of research rank than any other university in the top 50 in the United States. And NYU is now number 15. NYU is now ranked number 15 in the United States as a research university in terms of our investment in R&D, and number 7 among private institutions in the United States. So we've done great work. It's been a lot of fun. And that is my story.
Thank you so much, Stacie, for sharing your story with us. That was so interesting. It's always so interesting to me to hear how people's paths and experiences and the work that they do sort of contribute to getting them to where they are, as well as contribute to who they are becoming, because obviously we're always changing, we're always growing. And hearing your story, you've had such a distinguished and varied career and accomplished so much even before NYU. And now you have this very sort of global position where you are, in charge of a lot and have a lot of responsibility. Um, eh, Thinking back over your life, was this a position you ever imagined finding yourself in?
It's so amazing. No, I pinch myself all the time. I absolutely cannot believe how lucky I got.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering if you could share maybe one or two, looking back over your career, what are one or two maybe high points, highlights that you are most proud of that you would like to share?
Sure. So I think it's more of a kind of personal insight than a career highlight. I think the decision that I made when I was graduating as a student and entering the workforce officially to be very intentional about my career was one of the most important things. And so I think it's very easy for people to stumble upon opportunities or become paralyzed in a position and stay for too long, potentially get bored. But it's also possible for people to get promoted because their boss left and the job is open and someone asked them if they want to take it. I don't feel like I was ever like that. I feel like I was very intentional and ambitious the entire time. And I was really seeking out opportunities for myself and kind of knew that I wanted to do something bigger. So I often found myself after a few years in a role thinking, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? I'm ready to do something. I just feel it in me. I'm ready to do something. This is the first job that I've ever had where I just feel totally content.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking for the next opportunity because every day here has been so interesting.
I love what you said just now about intentionality. I think that is so important, and especially in academia and in the science field, in the STEM fields, excuse me. Um, Although we have come a long way, um, and there are way more women in leadership positions and way more women stepping up and taking the mantle of leadership, there's still a lot to do. There's still a lot of gaps. There's so many gaps to fill. And obviously and it's interesting because women do outnumber men in academia and have for several years,
Yes.
just not in terms of leadership. And I think that intentionality in pursuing and in moving forward and in being ambitious is something really important for people to be able to rise through the ranks and hopefully accomplish as much as you have done. Would you agree?
I completely agree. I also think it's so important to have women in these leadership positions because, right, you have to see that it's possible. NYU is a place that's filled with women leaders. We have a woman provost, we have a woman president, we have a woman general counsel. Our head of HR is a woman. I mean, we have women. Our CFO is a woman. I could go on and on and on. Many of our deans are women. Many of our chairs are women. So this happens to be a place that's very, very supportive of women in science and in academia. And then as a woman, right, it's our job to support other women and other people who are struggling so that they can come up through the system with equity and have accessibility to opportunities, and being aware that people may need different things at different stages of their careers. And we need to be able to meet people where they are and support them so that they can keep climbing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another thing that really struck me about your presentation, and I really think is so important, is the role of mentors. And obviously, you won a prize from the Society for Neuroscience for your dedication to mentorship. And in your story, you definitely highlighted the value of the women mentors in your life. You mentioned, I believe it was Dr. Karen Gale, as someone who was crucial. Um, and the advice you got and how that was super helpful. I was wondering, do you have any advice for younger scientists coming up in this space, particularly young women, on how they can go about connecting with and building relationships with mentors, so that they can hopefully get some of those same benefits in their lives too?
Yeah, the issue of mentorship is so interesting to me because you have the people you've learned from, you have the people who have mentored you, and then you also have anti-mentors, right? People who you know you do not want to be like. And those anti-mentors are just as important a lot of times as your mentors. Um, Finding a good mentor is something that's really, really challenging. I think you need to have a few things. You have to have really good chemistry with the person. You have to be yourself, a competent person. And I think there's a character issue also. So chemistry, character, competence, things that I think about a lot. And then matching up with a person who's going to have the time, the bandwidth, and the desire to really support you in that kind of way is really important. So, I say seek out those people. If you find somebody, man, woman, doesn't matter, who you admire, who has done something with their career that you would love to see yourself do, I always say reach out. People are very generous with their time. A lot of people really want to help. That's the part of the job that feels so good, is watching other people succeed, right? That's what leadership is. It's not for you anymore, right? It's for other people. That's the way I see it anyway. So I always say take the first step and make the introduction. Sometimes when you meet, it's not the right fit, and that's okay. But keep trying.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could just ask one more question. We're in a new year, so it's definitely sort of this time of looking ahead and planning and thinking about what we want to accomplish. So I was just wondering, what's at the top of your to-do list for this year?
Yeah. So I have an exercise. I'm so happy that you asked me that question. I did not know you were going to ask me that question. I have an exercise that I do on a pretty regular basis. My work team knows about it, and I've done the exercise with them too. We've actually sat down in a room and done it together, and I recommend it all the time. And it is a very simple exercise, and it is about intentionality and planning. And it is taking a piece of paper, or you could do it on your, I still love paper, but I guess you could do it electronically. Take a piece of paper, fold it in half. You have a line also that goes down the center, so it's in quadrants. The place where you folded the paper in half, that's where you're at right now on your life. The top of the line on the left are your personal accomplishments, and on the bottom are your professional accomplishments. Those things don't change, right? That's your history. And those can be anything that are meaningful to you. Maybe you took a wonderful trip. Maybe you finished a marathon. Maybe you had a child. You found a partner. Whatever those things are to you, write them out. And then your professional accomplishments also. And then thinking about your future, which is the other side of your paper, which is blank. What do you hope to accomplish? Do you want to travel to Thailand? Do you want to go on this hike? Do you want to buy a home? You know, whatever it is, a car, whatever the personal accomplishments are that you hope that you'll be able to achieve over the course of your life. And then professionally also, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? If you're content in your position, that's great. You can stay there. If you're looking for something new, jot that down and then try to stick to that. So I think it's a really useful exercise for seeing how far you've come and making sure that you're staying on a plan and on a path that inspires you to continue and that motivates you. So that's always my advice.
I love that. I might actually implement that one in my life too. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that brings us to the end of our discussion and concludes this session. I would like to thank you once again, Dr. Bloom, Stacie, for being here with us and for sharing your journey. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. It's really an honor.
Absolutely. Thank you. And to everyone else, thank you for being here. And please stay tuned for the next session in today's program. Hello, and welcome to this session of Inspiring Women Transforming Science, a virtual event by the Rosalind Franklin Society that highlights success and spotlights critical change makers. I'm Uduak Thomas, a senior editor at JEN, and it is my privilege to be your host for this university leadership and opportunity session. Without wasting any time, I'm going to get things underway. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest speaker for the session. Dr. Janet Currie wears several hats at Princeton University. She is the Henry Putnam Professor of Economics and Public Affairs at Princeton, the co-director of Princeton's Center for Health and Well-Being, and co-director for the Program on Families and Children at the National Bureau of Economic Research. In addition, she is a member of several national academies and has served as president of the American Society of Health Economics, the Society of Labor Economics, the Eastern Economic Association, and the Western Economic Association. And in 2024, she'll be adding another presidential feather to her cap when she takes the helm as president of the American Economic Association. Now, if those accomplishments were not already impressive enough, Dr. Currie was the first woman chair of the Department of Economics at Columbia University from 2006 to 2009, and she chaired the Department of Economics at Princeton from 2014 to 2018. She was a NOMIS Distinguished Scientist in 2019 and the 2023 winner of the prestigious Klaus J. Jacobs Research Prize. She has served on the editorial boards of many journals, and she is also a fellow of the American Academy of Political and Social Science, the Society of Labor Economists, and of the Econometric Society. She also has honorary degrees from the University of Lyon and the University of Zurich. And she was named one of the top 10 women in economics by the World Economic Forum in 2015. Dr. Currie is also a very accomplished researcher, and hopefully we'll have a chance to chat about some of her work. She is a pioneer in the economic analysis of child development. Currently, she studies socioeconomic differences in health and access to health care, environmental threats to health, the important role of mental health, and the long-running impact of health problems in pregnancy and early childhood. Dr. Currie, it's such an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to get started with a brief talk from you, and then we'll have a conversation, hopefully, about leadership and opportunities. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I grew up in Canada, where my father was a geologist working for the government, and my mother was a social worker I like to think that I combine my father's interest in science with my mother's interest in helping people through my work. I became interested in economics as an undergraduate at the University of Toronto because it offers a really useful set of analytical tools for addressing real-world problems. I then did my PhD at Princeton and have worked at a number of universities, including MIT, Columbia, UCLA, and Princeton. Most of my research investigates factors that contribute to child and then adult development. And the core idea is the idea of human capital. That is that all humans have skills, knowledge, and abilities that are of enormous value. Human capital is obtained through education, training, and experience, as well as through our investments in physical and mental health. I was trained as a labor economist, and labor economists think a lot about human capital, usually in the context of education. But I have been interested in health as a form of human capital as well, and in understanding how health and education interact to create adult outcomes. The linkages are very complex and reach across generations. For example, maternal health affects child educational outcomes, education affects parent and child health, and both have tremendous consequences. I was one of the first economists to help establish a new area of research in economics investigating the importance of the fetal period and early childhood, as well as of the cost effectiveness of early interventions during those periods. I've also consistently focused on documenting disparities between children, arguing that inequality starts before birth and that interventions targeted to the most disadvantaged children and their mothers often have the largest impact. A second contribution has been to develop methods for identifying the effects of interventions on children through the innovative use of existing, previously often underutilized administrative data, such as birth and death records, environmental monitoring data, and data on hospitalizations and emergency room visits. What you can see on the screen is an example of part of the data that's collected for every birth in the United States, which is usually around 3.5 million births every year. So a lot of these databases have millions of records. By pioneering linkages across these databases and finding natural experiments, I showed that it was possible to evaluate the effects of large-scale interventions on children's outcomes, and that it was possible to track long-term effects of early childhood interventions by following cohorts of affected children. My research on the effects of expanding public health insurance for pregnant women and children in the 1990s was influential. And on the screen, you can see how big these changes were. This work kind of got more attention during the run-up to the US Affordable Care Act that was passed in 2010. Earlier in the 80s and 90s, states had adopted expansions of insurance at different times and using different income cutoffs. And in work with Jonathan Gruber, we showed that this variation could be used to identify the effects of being eligible for insurance. This work provided the first evidence that these earlier expansions had reduced disparities in infant and child mortality and improved child health. For example, we found that they reduced infant mortality by 8.5%. It's inspired a large subsequent literature examining the longer-term effects of these expansions and demonstrating that public health insurance for pregnant women and children is one of the most cost-effective things that we can do in terms of improving children's future human capital. Another set of studies documented the effect of exposure to low levels of pollution during pregnancy on infant health, and eventually led to new standards for particulate matter. My recent work showing that subclinical levels of blood lead in children have long-term effects. I had the honor of presenting this to the cabinet at the White House in the run-up to the 2022 infrastructure bill, which included a lot of money for the removal of lead water pipes. Prior to my work on the US Head Start program, much of the early childhood intervention literature had focused on a fade out in the effects of interventions on test scores. I was able to demonstrate that only some children experienced fade out and that it was a function of the quality of the schools that they went to after their preschool experience. More importantly, all of the children appeared to benefit when longer-term effects on completed education were considered. This work contributed to an explosion of interest in the expansion of early childhood education programs, both in the US and in other countries like the UK, where this work was cited in the discussion about implementing the Sure Start program. It also led me to continuing research on the Head Start program using alternative methods. In addition to my research, I have the privilege to run the Interdisciplinary Center for Health and Wellbeing at Princeton. This center fosters research and teaching on many aspects of health and well-being in both developed and developing countries. Our goal is to understand the determinants of health and well-being and the role that public policy can play in promoting health. An important part of our work is educating both undergraduate and graduate students who aspire to careers in health and health policy. We currently have 62 affiliated faculty and send about 100 student interns for experiential learning experiences in locations in the US and all over the world. My discipline of economics has been lagging behind other STEM disciplines in terms of attracting, supporting, and retaining female professors. There's been improvement over time, but the trends are slow, very slow. It does take an awfully long time, as you can see in this figure, for people to go through graduate school, go through the hierarchy, and eventually perhaps become full professors somewhere. But even accounting for that long time lag, economics has been falling behind. It used to be thought that one of the main impediments to women in economics was similar for women in STEM fields generally, and that was an underrepresentation in mathematics. However, the extent of underrepresentation in mathematics has really diminished, and other STEM fields have made more progress in promoting women. Another general issue is the difficulty of juggling work and family. And here I think, while there are problems with academic employers and universities could do more, by and large, a university is a very flexible workplace compared to most other workplaces. Princeton offers on-site childcare, which is very good, as well as options for emergency childcare and elder care. Role models are also important, and as the university becomes a friendlier place for women, that can create a virtuous cycle where, because there are women there, more women feel comfortable in that environment. This slide is showing me, circa around 1984, talking to one of my professors. All my professors were male. This is Angus Deaton, who later won a Nobel Prize in economics. It was a wonderful environment, but also somewhat intimidating for women. This year's Nobel laureate in economics, Claudia Goldin, visited Princeton when I was a graduate student, and that was tremendously influential for me. Her visit was the first time I had seen a woman who was not only succeeding, but thriving in what seemed like a man's world. Not only that, she was doing it on her own terms. While she was at Princeton, she wrote her famous book, The Gender Gap, about differences between men and women's success in the labor market. She was approachable and eager to talk about her work, and it made such a difference for me to see that. Some of my most important service in various roles has been to work to increase the diversity of economics and social science. I've done this at the department level by advocating for people from underrepresented groups and for people whose research falls outside the narrow confines of specific subdisciplines. As the economic department chair at Columbia and Princeton, I was able to hire more than a dozen women and diversify field coverage. I was also privileged to mentor many successful women like Anna Azer, who became chair of the department at Brown, on Maya Rosen-Slater, who just won the American Economics Association Prize for the best female economist under 40. I have served as the director of the Children's Program at the National Bureau of Economic Research since its inception. This program has fostered a new field in economics and served as an entree into the NBER for a diverse group of faculty, including many women. And as a program director at the National Bureau of Economic Research, I advised on the establishment of a code of conduct, which in turn served as a template for the American Economics Association's own code of conduct. I was deeply honored to receive the 2023 Klaus J. Jacobs Research Prize for work that was aimed at improving learning, development, and living conditions of children and youth. What you can see in these figures, or in the slides, is first of all, a kind of delightful exhibit that they created to highlight some of my work about the effects of reducing auto pollution on fetal health. You can see me and the chair of ETH playing with cars as part of that demonstration. And in the next slide, there's a group of women playing with blocks. These blocks are to demonstrate the building blocks of the Head Start program, the early childhood intervention program that I talked about earlier. Going forward with the proceeds of the prize, I plan to take my work in a new direction. Much of my past work and also much of the new economic research on children has focused on fetal development and early childhood interventions. But adolescence is likely to prove a third critical period that has so far been much less studied. A particularly salient issue for adolescents is that many mental health problems first start in adolescence, and proper treatment may be essential to helping affected children reach their adult potential. However, there's very little research looking at longer-term outcomes of mental health treatment in adolescents. In this slide, you can see great variation in the probability that children are being treated with antidepressants across US counties. So a very wide range of treatments are in use, but little is known about which treatments are the most effective and for whom. This is an area that's ripe for the use of new tools, such as machine learning using large-scale administrative data sets, which I've been trying to demonstrate in recent research. I would also like to explore a broader range of potential interventions, both with clinicians and through schools, since children spend much of their time in school. While the development of human capital remains at the core of my research, my findings have led to additional inquiries. For example, given the important role that pollution plays in damaging child development, it's important to know if Black people and other people of color are disproportionately affected. Previous studies typically focus on a single area, like a city, because many parts of the country lack ground monitoring stations. So in recent work, I've been able to show using satellite data that Black people are more likely to be exposed to air pollution across the US, although tighter standards under the Clean Air Acts have led to reductions in the Black-white gap. My work on medical care has highlighted the role that individual physicians often play in determining child treatment, which has also led to ongoing work trying to understand the sources of variation in physician practice patterns. I plan to continue working on all these areas in the future and am excited to continue doing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Currie. That was really great. It was super interesting. Thank you for sharing your research with us, first of all. It was very interesting for me just to see a little bit about how your work has started to influence public policies and interventions that are aimed at improving maternal health as well as supporting children's lifelong health and well-being. So thank you very much. I think, from your bio and also from just your presentation, you've clearly had a very distinguished career with lots of really impressive accomplishments and milestones. I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit, a couple of highlights. What are some of the things you are most proud of? And if you could tell us a little bit about why.
I think one highlight was that in 2011, I was chosen to deliver a distinguished lecture at the American Economics Association. And the reason why that was a highlight was because it felt like my research area was being accepted as a legitimate area of inquiry, whereas I had often felt kind of on the fringes before. And I had even had people tell me that what I was doing was interesting, but that it wasn't economics. So being able to present it to, thousands of economists as the, example lecture was really very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's very interesting. The other thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about a little bit was you mentioned during your presentation that there has been an improvement in retention of female economics professors in academia. And although obviously we've come a long way from probably the early days, it sounds like there's still a lot of underrepresentation of women in the space. And I think it's fair to say that that is probably true across multiple scientific disciplines for some of the reasons that you mentioned. And I appreciated the steps you mentioned Princeton has taken and a lot of the work you have done to kind of bridge that gap and get more women in the space. And I think that's really important. But are there other things that people could do, suggestions that you have that could maybe encourage women to stay in what can often be largely male-dominated fields? Are there things that people can do to make that more of a focus?
Yes. So one thing I didn't mention was that I was able, with a group of other women, to start a mentoring program for junior women in economics. And it's a relatively modest program. It brings people together for 2 days at the end of our annual meeting, and people work intensively on one paper or grant proposal, one piece of work. And then there's also workshops about navigating the tenure process and work-family balance and those kinds of things. And we actually did a randomized controlled trial to see if the program was effective, and we're able to follow people for long enough to see that it did have a significant effect on people getting tenure. And just sort of on an anecdotal level, one of the things that struck me participating as a mentor in this workshop was just how basic people's questions often are, the misperceptions that they may have, and also how few people they have that they trust to talk to, right? So a little bit of help can actually be enormously impactful when people have so little support. So, and also talking to people about what they got out of this workshop, one of the things that they often got out of it was a support group.
Yeah.
So they would suddenly know a bunch of other young women who were working in their same field that they could talk to, about things that happened, and so on. So that's one thing. Another thing that a lot of societies and organizations have been doing is trying to give some sort of ombuds services. And the American Economics Association, for example, has recently stepped up its game in terms of offering a wider range of ombud services and trying to make the membership aware that there is this resource that you can go to ask for advice. You can go and ask for possible things that you could do in a certain situation. They also offer conflict resolution services. And so I think moving in those directions. Another thing we're doing this year for the first time is offering bystander training. So what do you do if you see something happening that you don't think is very good? And so there's a lot of things that we can do to try and make the academic world more comfortable for people who haven't historically been well represented.
Absolutely. And if I could just ask you one more question, if you could give yourself, your younger self, a little bit of advice, and I think probably advice that would apply to other young people coming up. If you could give one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't beat yourself up.
That's a good
Because
one.
I think we're usually our own worst critics, and we're all trying to do the best that we can. And sometimes you don't always live up to your own high standards, but you just pick yourself up and keep moving on.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our discussion today and concludes this session. I'd like to say a special thank you to Dr. Currie for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you again for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. And to everyone else, thank you for being here, and please stay tuned for the next session in today's program. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Inspiring Women Transforming Science, a virtual event by the Rosalind Franklin Society that highlights successes and spotlights critical change makers. I'm Udwak Thomas, Senior Editor at JAN, and it is my privilege to be your host for this University Leadership and Opportunities session. I'm not going to waste any time. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest speaker for this session. Dr. Wesley Harris is a professor of aeronautics and astronautics and head of Newhouse Residence Hall at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's also served as head of MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, as associate provost for faculty equity. And before joining MIT, he worked as the associate administrator for aeronautics responsible for all programs, facilities, and personnel in aeronautics at NASA, as vice president and chief administrative officer of the University of Tennessee Space Institute, and as dean of the School of Engineering and professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Connecticut. His list of accomplishments does not stop there. He's also served as chair and member of various boards and committees of the National Research Council, the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Army Science Board, University Space Research Association, and several state governments. He's also served on the committees of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, the American Helicopter Society, and the National Technical Institute. And in addition to that, he has served as an advisor to colleges, universities, and institutes. Dr. Harris is also a prolific researcher with interests in unsteady aerodynamics, aeroacoustics, rarefied gas dynamics, hypersonics, sustainment of capital assets, and chaos in sickle cell disease. And he has made seminal contributions in each of those research fields. Now, if those accomplishments weren't impressive enough, Dr. Harris is also the current vice president of the National Academy of Engineering, and he's an elected fellow of several associations for engineering achievements, engineering education, management, and advancing cultural diversity. Dr. Harris, we are so pleased to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get things started with a brief talk from you, and then you and I will have a brief discussion. So, with that, the floor is all yours.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to have a chat to sort of dissect my world line. How did I arrive at this point, and what role has mentors in particular played in enabling me to understand science, to contribute to science and engineering, and to transfer some of the fundamental pillars of advancement that I learned, absorbed along my journey. I'd like to start with Richmond, Virginia, 100 miles or so south of the nation's capital. I was born and reared in Richmond, Virginia. Virginia, and Richmond in particular, has had a very prominent role in the history of the U.S. In addition to being the capital of the state of Virginia, it was also the first capital of the Confederacy. And it has a long history related to that. As a high school student, at the conclusion or during my junior year, I was taking high school physics. The instructor, the teacher, the mentor, the spark was an African American woman by the name of Eloise Bowes Washington. Eloise Bowes Washington was every ounce, every gram, a Southern Black woman in appearance, in intensity, in sharpness, in mercy. She went north in the late 40s to the University of Pennsylvania to earn a master's degree in physics. At that time in Virginia, the schools were segregated. We were not even allowed to go to the public libraries for reading material. Only whites could go to the public libraries. But Eloise Bowes Washington went north, earned her degree in physics, master's degree, and returned to Richmond, knowing that she would not be able to obtain employment at a university, nor any other laboratories, the few that existed in Richmond at the time. So she ended up teaching physics at Armstrong High School in Richmond. That's when she decided to take me under her wing. We built a cloud chamber to investigate the collision of afroparticles with water droplets. We started with a clean sheet of paper. We built the chamber. We bought our dry ice. We produced the clouds. We took the dials from a watch in order to generate the afroparticles. We actually observed and photographed the collision of those afroparticles with water droplets. We developed a poster we took our project to the Black High School Science Fair in Virginia. The project won first place in that competition. Mrs. Washington was excited and suggested we take our project, the cloud chamber, the collision of afroparticles with water droplets, to the White High School Science Fair in Virginia, which we did, and it came in third. Ms. Washington said it came in third because of some problems with her guidance, which was clearly wrong. Well, she said to me, because it was third, that I had a responsibility, a duty. I must go to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which is where the White High School Science Fair was held. So Ms. Washington, having taken care of me in so many dimensions, guiding me intellectually, bringing me along socially, making me understand or offering me an opportunity to understand what this world is about, what it means to work hard. Work as hard as you have to, Wesley, if excellence is the objective. Let excellence be the determining factor as to how hard you're working. So I asked Ms. Washington, why must I go to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville? She gave me 3 reasons. First, she said, Wesley, when they see you, there'll be no question that you are Black. In those days, you were a Negro. Second, Wesley, you will succeed academically. You will demonstrate to whites that absolute scholarship by a Black person, a Negro, is a product, that you will do this. And third, she said, Wesley, this is 1960 now. They, whites, cannot kill you. So I saluted, went to the University of Virginia, knowing full well that I could never, ever obtain at Virginia what I wanted. I wanted to be like Mrs. Washington. I wanted a degree in physics. The University of Virginia would not allow Blacks to major in physics, no chemistry, no mathematics, no English, no economics, no French, no religion even. We were only allowed to enter the University of Virginia in the School of Engineering. And that last point that Mrs. Washington made about they can't kill you, UVA in those days was an institution with 4,000 students, white men, no women, and 7 Black men. And the reputation that goes with 32 fraternities, white fraternities, not sororities, and the drunkenness and the drinking. So there was a real concern about danger. But I saluted, majored in aerospace engineering, first student to graduate from UVA with honors in engineering. First African-American elected to membership in the Thomas Jefferson Literary and Debating Society, which is the oldest literary and debating society in America. And Ms. Washington was always there, checking, calling, making sure that I was okay and that I did not forget the second objective, absolute scholarship. Excellence is the objective. You work as hard as you need to be in order to obtain that goal of excellence. So the profoundness of Eloise Bowes Washington, the confidence, the belief, the the stimulation, the wholesomeness, the foundation that she provided has been the rock upon which I stand even today. Another important part of Eloise Bose Washington was the idea of giving and sharing. Somehow she was able to take a look at a poor, underserved, underrepresented young Black boy in Richmond and not to be afraid of him, but she could discern something of value and decided not to let it go, but to nurture it and make it grow. And I've tried to make sure that's what I offer my graduate students in hypersonics, my graduate students in unsteady aerodynamics, my graduate students in chaos and sickle cell disease. It's Eloise Bose Washington that provided the foundation that sustains Wesley Harris. Clearly, there have been other mentors along the way. At the University of Virginia, I identify John Edward Scott, George B. Matthews, and John Langley, happen to be all white men. Scott and Matthews are graduates of Princeton University, aerospace. Not only did they mentor me as an honors student or tutored me as an honors student at the University of Virginia, but they made it very clear that if I wanted to graduate from UVA, I could do so if and only if I go to Princeton for my PhD, which I did. I mean, this is really true. It's not making this up. And at Princeton, there are two mentors, George Bienkowski, my thesis advisor, and Professor Harvey Lamb, who's on my committee. Both gentlemen have passed now. George Bienkowski said to me, Wesley, you're at Princeton. You will write an excellent thesis. That's sort of a given at Princeton. Sort of like you don't ask for excellence at Princeton. It's there. He said to me, Wesley, what Princeton is about is not the PhD, it's what you take from Princeton for life. That will never leave you, that will always be with you. So we had discussions about that. You know, and in abstract terms or in concrete terms, really, what you take away from Princeton, what George Bienkowski wanted me to really understand is that, number one, what is a well-posed problem? Be it in aerospace, be it in chaos and sickle cell, what be it in economics, be it in sustainment, what's a well-posed problem? What is the hypothesis coming out of that well-posed problem that you want to prove or disprove? Number two, Wesley, what are the key questions related to that hypothesis, related to the well-posed problem that you must answer in order to dissect that hypothesis? Number three, Wesley, what tools, analytical tools, today's world, you could use AI tools, computational tools, experimental tools that you need in order to answer those questions. And critically, number four, Wesley, how do you know, by what standard will you assess your work? Never, ever take the cake out of the oven until it's done. Okay. And that sort of fits what Ms. Washington was trying to say to me. Work as hard as you need to be excellent. Okay. Leave nothing unturned, unbaked. Do it all and do it well, because excellence is the only mark that makes a difference. So here we are today, resting on the shoulders of Eloise Bowes Washington and John Scott, George Matthews, John Langley, George Bienkowski, Harvey Lamb. And then here at MIT, my mentor was Leon Trilling. Leon lived to the age of 92. Leon's family left Poland in 1933, and from Poland to France, and from France to Portugal, and from Portugal to Cuba, and from Cuba to the US. Leon earned his PhD at Caltech, one of the first Jewish faculty members in engineering at MIT. I gave a presentation at MIT regarding my PhD work at Princeton. And Professor Trilling was in the audience during my presentation. And he remained there during the entire session, about 2 hours. He approached me at the end of the session and asked me would I consider teaching and performing research at MIT. And I told him no. Very eloquent man, speaking 4 languages. Very refined gentleman. So I said, I want to go back to the South, which I did. There was no internet in those days, but there were telephones. And Leon called constantly. Wesley, when are you coming to MIT? When are you coming to MIT? Leon, I don't want to go to MIT. I want to stay in the South. So I finally yield, realizing that either I would have to rip my phone out or respond to Leon in the affirmative, which I did. And that was the story of how I got to MIT. It's Leon Trilling, it's Leon Trilling, it's Leon Trilling. And he certainly has been my mentor throughout my MIT career. And I've been here, started in 1972, on and off for some 50 years. So that's the story. It all starts with Eloise Bowes Washington. Eloise Bowes Washington, in a sleepy old southern town, Richmond, Virginia, in a totally segregated community. All the teachers, all the instructors, principals, all the administrators, all of the students, all the football coaches were Black, were Negroes. We didn't even have new textbooks. The white high schools would send their used textbooks to Armstrong High School. Sometimes the pages were torn out. Sometimes the N word was used, nigger, 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 read this. But that didn't bother Eloise Bowes Washington. She wanted science. She wanted physics. She wanted excellence. And she was prepared to do whatever it takes to demonstrate excellence, whatever it takes in terms of reason, in terms of rational arguments, in terms of preparation, in terms of design, in terms of hard work for excellence. That's all she said. Hard work for excellence, Wes. Don't forget that. So that's my story.
Wesley, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. You have an incredible story, have had an incredible career, and obviously are paving the way for others to aspire to and reach the same excellence that you have done in your life. I'm truly, truly inspired. Thank you. And obviously, as you've highlighted throughout your presentation, the importance and power of mentors, Ms. Eloise Washington, who got you on that path early on and expected so much from you and pushed you and encouraged you to aspire to more, but also the other people who came along in your life later on down the road and encouraged you even further and mentored you even further. Um, and I imagine that some of our audience listening are thinking, how can I get mentors that similarly encourage and inspire me to reach for the stars and achieve excellence in my own career? So I was wondering, do you have any advice or recommendations, particularly for women and minorities in science and STEM fields, who are looking for those mentors and who do want to achieve excellence? How could they go about building and connecting with potential mentors and building those relationships?
Yeah. When I reflect on Eloise Bose, my relationship with Eloise Bose Washington, with John Scott and George Matthews and Bienkowski and Leon Trilling and others, I come to the power balance. Mrs. Washington maintained this superior position, as did Scott and Matthews and Longley and Bienkowski and Lamb and Trilling. So I said to my graduate students that I'm working with in hypersonics, it is Wes Harris's responsibility to reach out to each of those students. Wes Harris must believe that he is given an opportunity to develop talent, that he has the experience and maybe the wisdom to identify that talent, sometimes when it's not even obvious. But every graduate student, every undergraduate student that I am able to engage with, I look for an opportunity to serve that student. That's what Mrs. Washington did. So it's not incumbent upon the student so much as it is the mentor. The mentor must, because of the power balance, be able and willing to reach out to those who are offered to him or her just by their presence. Because you're here at MIT, there's something within you, within your background, that's worthy, that deserves my time, my attention, my ability to bond with you. To build scholarship, yes. But as George Bienkowski said, ideas and concepts for life.
So thank you so much. So you've been at MIT for several years and have accomplished a lot there. Even though you said you were somewhat of a reluctant recruit in the beginning. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what MIT is doing in terms of both supporting and mentoring women and minorities in STEM. Are there specific initiatives or projects or efforts to sort of build up both women and minorities in science?
The answer is absolutely yes. And when I began my career here in August of 1972, Jerry Wiesner was the president. A man named Paul Gray at the time was in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. Paul Gray eventually became president of MIT, immediately following Jerry Wiesner. So we're coming out of the Vietnam era. Now, this is 72, thereabouts, and or in the midst of the Vietnam era. And the undergraduate population of women, undergraduate students, that was maybe 5%. It was Paul Gray who made a decision to change that, including removal of the dean of admissions, bringing in a different person. Today, the population of women undergraduates is about 50%, maybe even 51%. A tremendous change in MIT to respect women as those who can produce scholarship, those that can be excellent in their work. That was the major change at MIT, in my view. Nancy Hopkins and other white faculty members certainly made the case, documented the research locally as to what role the few white women faculty members played in their respective departments. And it was Chuck Vest as president who took that report and moved forward with it. And we do have now a growing body of women faculty members, in particular, white women faculty members. I believe that that spirit is continuing. Along with the growth of white women faculty members, faculty of color have also grown by leaps and bounds since 1972, where we had at that point maybe 5. I think we now have 60 across the 5 schools that we have here at MIT. So there's been significant change in that regard. The undergraduate population of Hispanic or Latino students have grown and is continuing to grow. The undergraduate population of African Americans has stagnated and is rather flat. And those trends I don't want to try to explain. I simply present the data as it exists. MIT is active. MIT presents itself as an institution that believes in the value of inclusiveness and diversity in terms of getting the very best from all possible resources to make a better world. That's a part of what we are and how we tend to operate here at MIT. There are people, there are organizations, there are resources in place to advance that idea from the vice provost level all the way down to each department, some 20-odd departments having a diversity officer that's a paid employee to advance the idea of getting the very best that the world has to offer in terms of having an impact in developing a better world.
Wonderful, thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about your accomplishments. I just reading through your list of accomplishments and the research areas that you've done a lot of work in. There's such a rich and storied career. I was wondering if there were particular accomplishments, maybe 1 or 2, from your career that you would like to highlight that you are most proud of.
Yes, the first one is aeroacoustics. Okay, so this is all military. Okay, it's not civilian work. During the Vietnam conflict, the U.S. forces found itself losing helicopters, not by cannon fire or missiles or drones, but helicopters in Vietnam would fly over a forest, and a small caliber weapon in the hands of those living in the forest would be used to knock down, to destroy a helicopter. So the Army Research Office came to MIT and said, Wes, how do we solve that problem? And the problem, again, this is Biankowski now, the problem was noise, aeroacoustics. In that forest, with the human ear, no instrumentation, those on the ground in the forest could determine the type of helicopter, how fast it was flying, and from which direction it was coming, just with the human ear. Helicopters are very unstable devices if you lose the tail rotor. So with a small caliber pistol, you could destroy a helicopter. So we performed experiments and analysis in the aerocork wind tunnel at MIT that demonstrated how to reduce the acoustic signature without penalty on performance. Okay. Of course, you can always reduce the acoustic signature by stop flying, but that was not an answer. That was a constraint. They had to maintain performance. So we demonstrated that. And if you were to take a look at helicopters in today's environment in the military, they are fast and considerably quieter than what they were in the Vietnam era. And one of my PhD students was James Hubbard, an African American. He did a one-of-a-kind experiment in our aircork wind tunnel that demonstrated for the first time, and no one's ever been able to repeat this experiment, what happens in a phenomenon called blade slap. And Hubbard has gone on to be a member of the National Academy of Engineering, a full professor at Texas A&M University in College Station, and James Hubbard is African American. So that's one. Okay, another piece that I'm very excited about is work with another African American student. We ask ourselves, what happens if a person is in a car accident and there is a severe injury in the thigh area, and that large artery is punctured? The first responders, in order to prevent shock, loss of blood, will go in and rip up tendons, muscles, in order to clamp that artery. And to recover sometimes, if the person is able to walk again, can be very demanding. So Tilak and I developed a plasma, a fluid substance that has the same stress strain properties as human blood. We injected micro-sized iron particles into that plasma, that fluid that has the same properties, stress strain properties as human blood. The idea was to inject that substance, that plasma, laboratory-made plasma, and iron particles upstream of the wound. The heart still beating will force that substance toward the punctured artery. Clamp a magnet around that area. The magnet will attract those iron particles, form a gate, and stop the hemorrhaging without ever destroying or breaking or severing the muscles and tendons. And it can do it in significantly less time. So we tried this. We worked with our doctors and colleagues over at Mass General Hospital. We have demonstrated the success of this process with small animals. We now want to go forward with dogs, with pigs, with larger animals, and then, if we are pleased, we will attempt it with humans. So those are the two extremes: one military and one in the bio area.
So fascinating. Thank you so much. I'd be really interested to see how things progress with the second research projects that you described with the clamp, and hopefully that really works out. That sounds incredibly interesting and amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for being here with us today. That brings us to the end of our session. And I want to say once again, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your journey with us, sharing your research and all the work that you're doing. Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. All the best.
All right.